In this video, I'll go over more of the Apocalypse Triptych story arcs. If you like apocalyptic sci-fi, stick around. The Apocalypse Triptych is a 3-book anthology edited by John Joseph Adams. The titles are The End is Nigh, The End is Now, and The End is Come. Book 1 has stories leading to the apocalypse. Book 2 is stories during the apocalypse. And Book 3 is stories after the apocalypse. Most of the authors that put stuff into it submitted and wrote a story arc that goes across all 3 books. First story arc I'll discuss in this video is by Nancy Kress, and I'm calling it the Aggression Suppression arc. The first story has a long title, and it is Pretty Soon the 4 Horsemen Are Going to Come Riding Through. So a volcano in Indonesia has erupted several years before the story, and it spewed stuff into the atmosphere, but it isn't really affecting everyday life anymore. Olivia is a single mom with 2 daughters, Carrie and Sophie. When she gets a call about her daughter, she expects it to be about her older daughter Sophie causing trouble. She's surprised when she finds out it's about Carrie, her younger and much more passive child. During the events that follow the call, Olivia starts to wonder why Carrie and her friends seem to be so docile all the time. The volcano eruption seems to be kind of a red herring in this, but it's actually an important part of the story. Something in the eruption has affected the population of Earth. Olivia has concerns over her daughter's lack of aggressiveness. She's also worried that Sophie is a little too aggressive. The story doesn't have a lot of action in it, but it does set up the changes that are coming really well, and it uses Olivia's point of view to do that. I'd rate this one a 7 out of 10. The second story is called Angels of the Apocalypse. This one takes place about 15 years after the first, and the focus has shifted to Sophie from the first story. Her docile sister Carrie is living in a community full of people like her. Every time something bad happens there, Sophie's mother Olivia calls her and asks her to go stop whatever bad things are happening, since the passive people in the community just won't do it. They won't stand up for themselves. Sophie's tired of it, but she agrees to deal with it one last time. Most of the people at or below a certain age in this story are passive like Sophie's sister. They won't even defend themselves when they or their children are attacked. I think the question this one asks is, how much help is owed to a family member that won't help themselves? Sophie has a strained relationship with her sister because she's sick of helping. It's already made her angry at her mother, and it's affecting her relationship with her boyfriend as well, but she reluctantly keeps helping. I'd give this story a 7 out of 10. It has an explanation for what caused the docility of the population, and that explanation brings in an element that's a little out there, but it was set up in the first story, so it wasn't really out of left field. The last story in this arc is called Blessings. Decades have passed since the events of the first story. A father and daughter named Larry and Jenna are Sophie's descendants. They're living in a community of passives, and there are aliens walking among them. The aliens spend time in the passive communities and protect them from aggressive humans using the weapons of their ships in orbit. Another group of humans is preparing to attack Larry and Jenna's community. This story has a bit of action and a man-to-woman assault. It wasn't described in detail, but the implication was that it wasn't overly violent because of the passive nature of the victim. The victim then became emotionally attached to her aggressor, and it turns into a relationship. I found it really odd. However, considering that the woman had never experienced such forceful advances from a man, she probably didn't know what a response should be in this world years in the future with everybody being much more passive. It's really weird. I'd rate this story a 7 out of 10. The 2 viewpoints telling it are done pretty well, and the explanation of what is happening to the human race is also kind of interesting. The Aggression Suppression story arc overall gets a 7 out of 10 for me. As with most of Nancy Kress's work, the characters were excellently done and not clones of each other. The limited action that occurred was done well, and I thought the full reasoning behind the apocalypse was a pretty unique connection. The next set of stories is by Shannon McGuire. I'm not sure how you say her first name. I'll call this the Gray Mold story arc, and it has the stories Spores, Fruiting Bodies, and Resistance in it. In Spores, Megan is a woman working at a biolab. When she gets home to her wife and daughter one night, she sees a bowl of fruit covered in gray fuzz. She knows the fruit was purchased within the last day or so, so the rapid pace of the mold growth really worries her. She spends hours cleaning her kitchen with bleach, but it doesn't really get rid of all the gray matter. This story is pretty scary. The agent of the apocalypse here is the mold spores, and they can't be seen, so they'll get you without you even knowing it until you see the symptoms. It spreads rapidly because all it really takes is a light breeze to blow them around. There's no cure short of fire. Add to all that the fact that there are probably labs in various places throughout the scientific world today that are working on the very thing that caused this apocalypse, and it's pretty freaky, pretty scary. I'd rate this one a 7 out of 10 just for the fear factor alone. The second story in this arc is called Fruiting Bodies. The gray mold plague has killed most people because they don't know how to protect themselves from the spores. The only two characters in this one are Megan and her daughter Nikki. They spend their time trying to stay in ultraviolet light while searching for supplies in stores that haven't been opened to the general airflow and thus might not be contaminated. The night after one such supply run, a problem occurs because of one of the supplies that they picked up. The story was a good follow-up to Spores. Megan doesn't know if the gray mold plague reached other countries because all news sources and the internet have collapsed with no one to maintain them. As dangerous as they were, the gray mold should have ended civilization, and it seems to have ended it in the United States for sure. Megan's personal aversion to the mold makes the events of this story even more difficult for her to deal with. I'd rate this one a 6 out of 10. I had a hard time believing the final scene in this one. I just couldn't see the character going as far as she did. The final story in this arc is called Resistance. Megan has survived the gray mold plague, but everything in the world appears to have succumbed to the mold. When she awakens in a government facility, an army officer gives her a hard time and, in typical government fashion, tells her she's under arrest for running the lab that caused the gray mold plague. With everything that has happened, she feels like she deserves it. The story has a little action and a lot of navel gazing. However, this is navel gazing from the point of view of someone with obsessive compulsive disorder, and it's really interesting to read that point of view. It's causing her a lot of guilt. Should Megan feel guilty about the plague, even though the scientist that caused it, the scientist she was in charge of, didn't tell her about the contaminants in their research? She used to allow her now dead wife to eat food from her bowl despite her OCD. Should she feel guilty about it and link that simple act to a door opening and causing the end of the world? Megan seems to link her smallest acts to gigantic consequences that are surely coincidence. The story itself states that OCD manifests in many ways, and this is just one possibility. It's an interesting glimpse at what someone with OCD might go through on a daily basis. I'd rate this story a 7 out of 10. Overall, I'd rate the Grey Mold story arc a 7 out of 10. I enjoyed the stories, and of all the story arcs, this one and the Land of Nod arc that I covered in part 4 of this series are probably the scariest so far. The next story arc is by Jonathan Mayberry and has the stories She's Got a Ticket to Ride, Sunset Hollow, and Jingo and the Hammerman. The point of view in She's Got a Ticket to Ride is that of a man that finds people who have lost their way and then returns them to their home, sometimes against their will. Sometimes this is just finding them, other times it's extracting them from things like a cult, so it may or may not be against their will. In this case, he has to extract a rich 18-year-old woman named Annabeth from a cult that believes that a rogue planet called Nibiru is about to crash into Earth and end all life. I really enjoyed the point of view in this story. The narrator talks about what his job is like and some of the things he's seen. He mentions that everyone in his line of work drinks because they have to forget some of the crazy stuff that they see. On his current job, the cult he infiltrates turns out to be just similar enough to other cults to be dangerous, but possibly different enough that their belief might actually be correct. I'd rate this one 7 out of 10. As I said, the background info was interesting, and the point of view wasn't like any point of view I've read before. The story seemed to go pretty quickly because of that alone. The next story in this arc is called Sunset Hollow. This one is a tale about the beginning of a zombie apocalypse. Sunset Hollow is a town where Tom, a 20-year-old police academy cadet, and his toddler stepbrother Benny just saw his dad turn zombie and his mom push them out of the house to protect them. The rest of the story is basically Tom fighting off zombies while trying to get away with Benny. There's really not much to the story. The title says it is a rot and ruin story, so if you've read that series by Jonathan Mayberry, you might like this if you're any kind of completist like I am. I haven't read that series, but I'd rate this story about a 5 out of 10. and say that I'm disappointed that Mayberry didn't continue on with the Nibiru stuff from the first story. This story is told well with a lot of urgency, as you'd expect when someone is trying to escape a hungry mob, but there wasn't anything in it that made me take extra notice. The final story in this supposed story arc is called Jingo and the Hammerman. Jingo is a cutter, which is someone that is responsible for cutting the hands off zombies and immobilizing them. Moose, his buddy, is a hammerman who is responsible for smashing the heads of zombies that are felled by the cutters. Together, the two men have a conversation about where humanity needs to go and what steps are needed. The story is told from Moose's point of view, but he knows enough detail about Jingo to make Jingo an interesting character too. Jingo's optimism makes him likable, while Moose is a bit more cynical but considers himself and Jingo a good pair. This story did something that a lot of zombie fiction doesn't do. It considers the steps needed to get to a better future. Jingo believes that even though the situation is bad now, the books he's read from many self help gurus, such as Dr. Phil and especially Tony Robbins, are showing him the best way to stay positive and plan for the future. I'd rate this story a 6 out of 10. It has a twist that seems ironic near the end, but at the same time, it threatens to destroy Jingo's entire worldview, so it's pretty good. So this story arc by Jonathan Mayberry wasn't really a story arc, so I can't give it an overall rating. The first story wasn't related to the last two stories. The last story didn't say it was a rotten ruin story, so it's unclear if the second and third story are related to each other, even though both have zombies in them. I personally think that the first story could have been continued by saying that the coming catastrophe in it wasn't as bad as expected. I mean, I think you could have said that there was, instead of a full impact, there was just a glancing blow, so to speak, which that'll only make sense if you read the first story in the arc. And that's 3 more story arcs down. If you want to leave any comments or recommend any other apocalyptic fiction to me, please do so in the comments. If you have any other thoughts, please leave them. And bye for now.